My name is Lily, and I'm 28 years old. A month ago, I sat in a lawyer's office, a sterile room that smelled of old paper and quiet grief, and listened as my parents' last will and testament was read aloud. In a few cold, legal sentences, it erased me completely, leaving their entire multi-million-dollar estate to my older brother, Mark. He smirked, my relatives shook their heads in pity, and nobody believed me when I said something felt wrong. What they didn't know was that my father, a man of contracts and fine print, had left one final clause hidden in the text, a dead man's switch designed to test the very core of his golden child's character. And my brother was about to fail spectacularly. If you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, take a moment to drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And please, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories about how the quietest people can find the loudest voice when it matters most. Before that fateful meeting, my life was defined by a quiet, predictable rhythm. I work as a librarian and a rare book restorer, a profession that suits my personality. I find solace in the patient, meticulous work of bringing something broken back to life. My world is one of hushed stacks, the gentle crackle of aging paper, and the subtle scent of leather and ink. It's a small life, a peaceful one, but one I was content with. My parents, David and Eleanor, never quite understood it. To them, my life was a mild disappointment, a beige watercolor painting in a gallery full of their son's explosive, vibrant oil canvases. Mark, my brother, is 2 years older, and my polar opposite. He's a high-flying finance manager in the city, driving a car that costs more than my yearly salary, and living in a glass-walled apartment with a panoramic view of everything I was not. He was their pride, their joy, the sun around which our family's universe orbited. I was merely a moon, reflecting his light, dutiful and always present, but rarely truly seen. This wasn't a new development. It was the foundation upon which my entire childhood was built. The pattern of injustice was woven into the fabric of our family history, a constant, dull ache I had learned to live with. I remember when it was time for college. Mark was sent to a prestigious private university, his tuition paid without a second thought. My parents also funded his expensive downtown apartment, his study abroad trips to Europe, and the tailored suits he needed for his internships. When my turn came, my father sat me down at the kitchen table. "Lily," he said, his voice laced with a tone of practical finality, "business is a solid investment. Mark will carry the family name forward in the world of commerce. For you, well, the local community college is an excellent, more practical choice. It makes more sense financially." I didn't argue. I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for my 4-year degree at the state university, living at home to save money. I graduated with honors and without debt, a victory that felt entirely my own, but it went uncelebrated. It was simply what was expected of me, to be responsible, to be quiet, to be no trouble at all. The disparity wasn't just financial, it was emotional. 3 years ago, our mother, Eleanor, had to undergo a serious knee replacement surgery. The recovery was long and arduous. I moved back into my childhood bedroom for 3 months to be her full-time caregiver. I cooked every meal, managed her medication, drove her to physical therapy, and helped her navigate the house. I spent hours reading to her, just sitting with her when the pain was too much. During those 3 months, Mark visited exactly once. He strode in, dressed in a crisp designer shirt, stayed for 15 minutes, took a selfie with Mom for his social media with the caption, "Family First," and then announced he had an urgent client dinner he couldn't miss. That evening, my father called me into the study. I expected a word of thanks. Instead, he said, "Your brother has such a demanding job, yet he still made the time to come all the way out here." He's a good son. He didn't say a word about the 90 days of my life I had put on hold. He didn't see me at all. He only saw Mark's performative gesture. This pattern of being overlooked became my normal. They forgot my 25th birthday entirely, only remembering 2 weeks later when a cousin called to ask what they'd gotten me. There was a flurry of awkward apologies and a hastily purchased gift card. 6 months later, they threw Mark a lavish, catered surprise party for his 30th, flying in his friends from across the country. I stood in the corner of my own home, serving drinks and clearing plates, feeling like a ghost at a feast held in honor of a king. I loved my parents. I truly did. But their love for me felt like a utility reliable, expected but unadorned, and taken for granted. Their love for Mark was a spectacle, a grand public declaration filled with fireworks and applause. I accepted it. I built my own life, found my own joy in the quiet corners they overlooked. I tended to the gardens my mother loved but no longer had the energy for. I digitized all my father's old case files, a project that took months, just to make his life easier. I was the dutiful daughter, the fixer, the quiet pillar holding up the structure while they admired the flashy architecture of my brother's success. I thought their lifelong neglect was the worst of it, the deepest cut I would have to endure. I had no idea their final act, from beyond the grave, would be the most brutal and defining cut of all. I believed that by being good, by being helpful, I was securing my place in their hearts. I never imagined they were simply keeping me around as a placeholder, and that their final testament would be to formally declare me irrelevant. The event that shattered our family's fragile equilibrium was as sudden as it was absolute. It arrived on a Tuesday in April, a day that had begun with the mundane promise of spring rain and the scent of damp earth. I was at the library, carefully restoring the spine of a first-edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was a state trooper. His voice was calm, professional, but the words he used were jagged and sharp, tearing through the quiet fabric of my afternoon. There had been an accident on the interstate. A semi-truck had lost control in the rain. My parents, David and Eleanor, had been in the other car. They were gone, both of them, instantly. Grief is not a wave. It's a sudden, soundless void. One moment, you are standing on solid ground, and the next, the entire world has vanished from beneath your feet. I remember dropping the delicate leather-bound book, its pages fluttering to the floor. I remember the drive to the hospital, the sterile hallways, the sympathetic, uniformed faces, but most of all, I remember the silence. The silence in the car, the silence in the waiting room, and the profound, deafening silence that followed the doctor's confirmation. I called Mark. He was in the middle of a meeting, his voice sharp with impatience when he answered. "Lily, this better be important," I told him. The line went quiet for a moment, and then he simply said, "I'll be on the next flight." The days that followed were a blur of logistics wrapped in a thick fog of sorrow. As the quiet, responsible one, the burden of arrangements naturally fell to me. I chose the caskets, wrote the obituaries, and fielded the endless calls from relatives and friends. Mark arrived the next day, and immediately, the dynamic shifted. While I was lost in the quiet, personal pain of losing my mother and father, Mark's grief was a performance. He became the master of ceremonies for our family's tragedy. He stood at the funeral home, accepting condolences with a somber, practiced grace, recounting grand stories of our father's legal prowess and our mother's social charm. He spoke of their legacy, of the empire they built, his voice booming with a false strength that felt more like a business presentation than a eulogy. I, on the other hand, was a mess. I couldn't speak without my voice breaking. I hid in the background, my grief too raw and real for public display. I noticed something unsettling during those days. while I was comforted by my parents' old friends, people who had known me since I was a child and who hugged me with genuine warmth, whispering, "You were such a good daughter to them, Lily." They were so lucky to have you. Mark was already talking business. I overheard him on the phone in the driveway, his voice low and urgent. "Yes, the estate is significant. We need to get everything in order as soon as possible. Executor." "Yes, that will be me. Let's schedule a preliminary meeting for next week." It was less than 48 hours after they had died. The cold calculation in his tone sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as his way of coping by controlling the situation. The funeral was a grand affair, just as they would have wanted. The church was overflowing. Mark delivered a powerful, moving eulogy that left half the congregation in tears. He spoke of their ambition, their drive, and their love for him. He mentioned me only once, a brief, passing reference, and to my sister, Lily, who always held down the fort at home. It wasn't meant to be malicious, but it felt like being defined as a piece of furniture useful, reliable, and inanimate. After the service, as we stood by the graveside, the first drops of a cold rain beginning to fall, Mark draped a heavy arm over my shoulder. His expensive cologne was cloying, out of place in the earthy scent of the cemetery. "Don't you worry about a thing, little sister," he whispered, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I know this is all overwhelming for you, but I'll handle everything. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I leaned into him, grateful for what I mistook as a moment of brotherly protection. I didn't realize at the time that his definition of taken care of was a threat, not a promise. He was promising to handle everything, and I, in my grief, believed him. I couldn't have known that his first order of business would be to methodically and legally write me out of existence. The call from my father's longtime attorney, Mr. Henderson, came a week after the funeral. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday. The tone of his voice was somber, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite place pity, perhaps. Mark insisted on driving us to the appointment. "It's better if we present a united front," he'd said, a phrase that sounded more like a corporate strategy than a family sentiment. Mr. Henderson's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of polished mahogany, leather-bound books, and quiet, immense power. It was my father's world, not mine. I felt small and out of place in my simple black dress. Mark, however, looked right at home, greeting the paralegals by name and settling into a plush leather chair as if he owned it. Mr. Henderson, a kind-faced man in his late 60s with weary eyes, greeted us both with a solemn handshake. He had known me since I was a little girl, always slipping me a lollipop after my father's meetings. Today, there were no lollipops. His eyes held a deep, uncomfortable sadness as he looked at me. He cleared his throat and began to read. The document was filled with the usual legal jargon, but the core of it was brutally simple. They left a few token heirlooms to distant cousins. They made a donation to their favorite charity. And then came the final, devastating paragraphs. "To my beloved son, Mark, Mr." Henderson read, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, in recognition of his ambition, his success, and his readiness to carry on the family legacy. "I bequeath my entire remaining estate, including all properties, investments, and personal assets." He paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. "To my daughter, Lily, for whom we have provided a home and support throughout her life, we leave our love and best wishes for her future." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Love and best wishes. That was it. I had been disinherited. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. It couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. I looked at Mark, expecting to see shock, confusion, anything. Instead, I saw a flicker of a triumphant smirk. quickly masked by a facade of somber responsibility. He knew. He had known this was coming. "Mr. Henderson," I stammered, my voice a small trembling thing. Is that all?" He looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrow that seemed to exceed the normal bounds of his professional duty. "I'm afraid so, Lily," he said softly. Then he added a sentence that felt like a prison sentence. "The will stipulates that as you are currently residing in your parents' primary residence, you are permitted to remain there for a period of 90 days, after which the property will be under the full control of the executor, Mark." 90 days. I had 90 days before I would be homeless. Mark placed a condescending hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Lily. We'll figure something out for you," he said, his voice oozing with false magnanimity. In that moment, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I saw him for what he was, not a grieving brother, but a conqueror claiming his spoils. The escalation began the very next day. I was still reeling, walking through the house like a ghost, when Mark arrived with his girlfriend, Tiffany. She was a woman who looked as though she was assembled from a catalog of luxury brands, and she surveyed my mother's tastefully decorated living room with a critical eye. "This will all have to go," she announced to Mark, waving a dismissive hand at the antique furniture I had helped my mother pick out. "The walls need to come down. Open concept is a must." They walked through the house with a tape measure, discussing renovations, their voices echoing in the quiet halls. They spoke as if I wasn't there, as if I was already a part of the past, a piece of old furniture to be discarded. That afternoon I found Mark in my father's study, boxing up his personal effects. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Getting a head start," he said without looking up. "These things need to be put in storage. We need to clear the place out to get it on the market as soon as possible." He was not just my brother. He was now my landlord, and my eviction had already begun. 2 days later, the financial cutoff came. I went to the grocery store using the joint household account my parents had set me up with years ago to manage bills and expenses. The card was declined. Humiliated, I called the bank. They informed me that the account had been frozen and its contents transferred to a new account under the name of the estate's executor. When I confronted Mark, he was completely unapologetic. "That money is part of the estate now, Lily." "My estate," he said coolly. "You're an adult. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. Mom and Dad coddled you for too long." Coddled me. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I was the one who had managed this house, cared for our mother, and given up years of my life in service to them, and he called that being coddled. The gaslighting was perhaps the worst part. I tried to appeal to him, to the brother I remembered from our childhood, the one who used to read stories to me. "Mark, why are you doing this?" I pleaded one evening as he was tagging furniture with colored stickers, red for storage, yellow for donation. "Don't you remember us growing up here? Don't Mom and Dad's memories mean anything to you?" He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "I'm doing what they wanted, Lily. They knew you couldn't handle the responsibility of this estate. They were protecting you from yourself. You should be grateful." He twisted their cruelty into an act of love. A narrative so warped it made me question my own sanity. Was I being oversensitive? Was he right? The moment of clarity came from my best friend, Clara. She came over one night and found me sitting on the floor in my room, surrounded by half-packed boxes I had no idea where to take. I told her everything, the will, the 90-day notice, Mark and Tiffany's renovation plans. She listened, her face growing darker with every word. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or gentle comforts. She was furious. "Grateful?" she practically shouted, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "You should be grateful he's throwing you out of your own home? Lily, this isn't just unfair, this is monstrous. Your parents used you as a live-in caretaker for years, and this is how they repay you? And Mark, He's not your brother right now. He's a vulture." Hearing her say it, hearing the righteous anger in her voice, was like a splash of cold water to the face. She was right. My feelings were valid. The situation wasn't just unfortunate. It was profoundly wrong. Her words solidified something in me that had been wavering. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being overly emotional. I was being erased, and I had every right to be angry. That night, I decided I wouldn't just pack my bags and disappear quietly. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to fight back. I had no idea that Mark, in his arrogance and greed, was about to hand me the very weapon I needed. For the next few weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of my life going to work, packing boxes, politely ignoring Tiffany's constant stream of passive-aggressive comments about my clutter. I was building a wall around my heart, trying to survive the 90-day countdown. Mark seemed to relish his new role as Lord of the Manor. He started having real estate agents tour the property, slick men and women in sharp suits who would walk through my home, discussing its potential and resale value while I tried to make myself invisible in a corner. Each tour felt like a violation, a fresh wave of grief for a home I was losing, before I had even fully mourned the people who had made it. I tried to reason with him one last time. I found him on the back patio, on a call with a contractor. I waited until he was finished. "Mark," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I know the will is what at Island. But this house, this is our childhood home. Can't you at least wait until the 90 days are up before you sell it? Can't you give me a little more time to say goodbye?" He sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of pure exasperation. "Lily, you're thinking with your heart, not your head. The market is hot right now. Waiting is financially irresponsible. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper as if he were letting me in on a brilliant secret, "I've already got a cash offer, way over asking. I'd be a fool not to take it." He wasn't just selling a house. He was liquidating a memory for profit. The speed and glee with which he was doing it was what felt so utterly profane. The final, unforgivable act, the one that shattered my composure and ignited a fire in me I didn't know I possessed, happened on a Saturday morning, exactly 45 days into my 90-day grace period. I woke up to the sound of a hammer pounding into the front lawn. I looked out my bedroom window and my blood ran cold. There, staked into the manicured grass my mother had been so proud of, was a large, garish "for sale" sign, and underneath it, a smaller sign that read, "Sale pending." He hadn't even waited. He had a deal in place and was advertising it on the lawn of the home I was still living in. It was more than an insult. It was a public declaration of my irrelevance. It was a message to me and to the entire world that I was nothing, a temporary obstacle who would soon be removed. My grief, my memories, my connection to this place, none of it mattered in the face of his ambition. That sign was the Zotnuk Chanli, the breaking point. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about dignity. It was about the erasure of my existence, and I suddenly, fiercely, refused to accept it. All the years of being the quiet one, the good girl, the one who never made waves, evaporated in a single searing moment of clarity. The quiet sorrow I had been nursing curdled into a cold, hard rage. I looked at that sign, and I remembered a conversation with my father from years ago. I had been upset about some injustice at school, and he, in a rare moment of paternal advice, had told me, "Lily, emotions are noise. Facts are power. If you believe you are right, find the facts to prove it. A well-reasoned argument is a fortress." My father had been a lawyer, a man of details, of loopholes, of clauses and subclauses. He was meticulous to a fault, and as I stared at that sign, a strange thought began to form in my mind. The will had been so brutally, unnaturally one-sided. It wasn't just unfair. It felt incomplete. My father was a complex man, often emotionally distant, but he was also a man who believed in balance and fairness, at least in the abstract world of the law. Why would he write a will that was so glaringly, cruelly imbalanced, unless it wasn't the whole story? My heart started to pound. I thought of Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. I remembered the look in his eyes, not just sympathy, but something deeper, a pained knowledge, as if he knew something he couldn't say. He had been my father's closest friend for over 40 years. Would he really have allowed his friend to commit such a cold, final act of cruelty against his own daughter without a fight? The Bungteen moment was electric. I wasn't just a victim of a cruel will. I was a character in a story, and I felt with every fiber of my being that I had missed the final chapter. Mark, in his haste and greed, had put that sign on the lawn. He had formalized his intention to sell the house, long before he legally had to. He had created a fact, a piece of evidence, and I suddenly knew, with an instinct I couldn't explain, that his action was the key. I walked back inside, away from the window and the offending sign. I picked up my phone, my hands no longer shaking. I found Mr. Henderson's number. When his assistant answered, my voice was clear and steady. "Please tell Mr. Henderson that Lily called. And please tell him, my brother has put a for sale sign on the lawn." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then the assistant said, "Mr. Henderson will call you back in 5 minutes. Please do not go anywhere." I knew then that I had just unlocked a door, and I was about to find out what my father had truly hidden behind it. The 5 minutes I waited for Mr. Henderson's call felt longer than the preceding 45 days. I paced the living room, my mind racing. Had I imagined it all? Was this just the desperate hope of a grieving daughter, or was there really something more to the story? When my phone finally rang, I snatched it up on the first ring. "Lily, Mr." Henderson's voice was low and serious, devoid of the weary pity from our last meeting. It was replaced by something else, legal precision. "Did you say he put a sign on the lawn? Is it a formal listing with an agent?" "Yes," I said, my voice breathless. "It says sale pending." He told me he already has a cash offer. I heard him let out a long, slow exhale. "Lily, I need you to come to my office. Now. Come alone. And do not, under any circumstances, mention this call to your brother." The drive downtown was a blur. I walked back into that imposing office building, but this time, I didn't feel small or out of place. I felt a sense of purpose, a nervous energy thrumming through my veins. The receptionist showed me directly into Mr. Henderson's private office, bypassing the formal conference room. He was standing by the window looking out over the city. When he turned to face me, his expression was one of profound relief and grim satisfaction. "I've been waiting for this call, Lily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I was bound by my duty to your father and by the law not to say anything until a specific condition was met. Your brother, in his greed, just met that condition." He walked over to a large, fireproof safe in the corner of his office, spun the dial, and opened it with a heavy thud. From within, he removed a thick, sealed manila envelope. He placed it on the desk between us. My father's familiar, sharp handwriting was on the front. It read, "To be opened only upon Mark's formal attempt to sell the family home within 12 months of my passing." "What is this?" I whispered, my eyes fixed on the envelope. "This, Lily," he said, "is your father's true last will and testament." He proceeded to explain. My father, David, had been a brilliant and perceptive man. He saw Mark's ambition and his growing obsession with wealth and status. He also saw my quiet loyalty, my deep love for our family and our home. He was torn. He wanted to believe his son would do the right thing, that he valued family legacy over a quick profit. So, he designed a test, a legal and ethical trap. The will I read to you and your brother was entirely legal and binding, Mr. Henderson explained. However, it contained a hidden revocation clause, a springing clause, as we call it in the legal world. It stated that if your brother, as executor, took any formal action to list for sale or enter into a contract to sell the primary residence within 365 days of his death, the entire will he was named in would be immediately rendered null and void. May have dropped. So, Mr. Henderson continued, a faint smile playing on his lips. The moment that sign went up on the lawn and he entered into that pending agreement, he forfeited his entire inheritance. The first will essentially self-destructed. And the terms of this second document, the true one, came into effect. He slid the envelope across the desk to me. Your father never erased you, Lily. He was protecting you. He was just doing it in the only way a cynical, contract-loving lawyer knew how, with an escape clause. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were two things. The first was the official second will. It was simple and direct. It left a modest but respectable trust fund to Mark enough to live on for a year or two, but not enough to fund his lavish lifestyle. The rest, the house, the investments, the savings, the entire multi-million-dollar estate, was left to me. The second item in the envelope was a handwritten letter from my father. I unfolded it, my eyes blurring with tears as I read his words. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my greatest fear has come to pass. Mark has chosen money over memory. I am sorry to have put you through this ordeal. I know you must have been heartbroken, feeling abandoned by your mother and me. Please know, that was never the truth. We saw your quiet strength, your unwavering loyalty, your beautiful heart. We saw it all, even if we failed to say it often enough. I created this test not to be cruel, but to give your brother a chance to prove me wrong. I wanted him to see the value in home, in family, in the legacy we built beyond dollars and cents. If he had, he would be a wealthy man today. His failure is his own, not yours. This estate is now yours, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. You were always the true keeper of our family's heart. You love the home. You cherish the memories. You will be a worthy steward. Use these resources to build a life of peace and purpose. Live freely, live happily. Know that you were seen, you were valued, and you were, and always will be, deeply loved. Your father, David. I wept. I wept for the father I had lost, and for the father I had just found again in these pages. All the years of feeling invisible, of craving a single word of validation, were washed away by this final, profound act of love and trust. He hadn't abandoned me. He had orchestrated a masterpiece of legal protection, trusting that his son's greed would reveal itself, and that my quiet endurance would ultimately be vindicated. After I composed myself, Mr. Henderson and I began to form a plan. This was no longer about me begging for scraps. This was about me taking back what was rightfully mine. Your brother has scheduled a meeting here for Friday, Mr. Henderson said, his voice now sharp and strategic. He believes it's to sign the initial paperwork for the house sale with the buyer's attorney. He has no idea what's waiting for him. I suggest you be present. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the quiet librarian in the corner. I was going to be the main character. I walked out of that office not as a victim, but as the executor of my father's final, brilliant plan. And I couldn't wait for Friday. The 3 days leading up to Friday were the calm before the storm. I stayed at Clara's apartment, giving myself space from the toxic environment of the house. Mark barely noticed I was gone. He was too busy, leaving a string of arrogant voicemails about finalizing the paperwork and reminding me to have my remaining things cleared out within the week. Each message was a fresh piece of kindling on the fire of my resolve. I spent the time with Mr. Henderson, going over every detail of the plan. We were not just going to drop a bomb. We were going to dismantle his world, piece by piece, with the cool, irrefutable logic of the law. On Friday morning, I chose my outfit with deliberate care. Not a somber black dress of mourning, but a tailored navy blue blouse and trousers. It was an outfit that projected quiet confidence, the armor of a woman who knew her worth and was about to claim it. I met Mr. Henderson at his office an hour early. He had arranged the conference room precisely. On one side of the long mahogany table were 2 chairs for Mark and Tiffany. On the other side, a single chair for me. At the head of the table was Mr. Henderson, a stack of documents neatly arranged before him. Mark and Tiffany arrived precisely on time, striding in with the unearned confidence of people who believe the world belongs to them. Mark was dressed in a suit that screamed money, and Tiffany was already talking about which designer she would hire for the new house. They both stopped short when they saw me sitting there. "Lily, what are you doing here?" Mark asked, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "This is a legal meeting. You don't need to be involved in this part." "On the contrary," Mr. Henderson said, his voice calm and authoritative as he gestured for them to sit. "Lily's presence is essential. Please, have a seat. We have a few matters to clarify before we proceed with any sale documentation." Mark sat down, looking impatient. "Fine, but let's make this quick. The buyer's agent is waiting for my call," Mr. Henderson began. "Mark, as the executor of the initial will, you were given certain responsibilities and powers. However, you were also bound by its terms. We are here today because an action you have taken has triggered a specific condition within that will." Mark frowned, confused. "What are you talking about? I've done everything by the book." "Have you?" Mr. Henderson asked, his eyes locking onto Mark's. "On Saturday, May 15th. Did you not instruct a real estate agent to place a for sale sign on the property at 12 Elm Street?" He slid a photograph of the sign across the table. "Of course," Mark said with a dismissive wave. "I got a fantastic cash offer. It's good business." "And did you not enter into a sale pending agreement with a potential buyer, a copy of which was forwarded to my office yesterday?" Mr. Henderson slid a copy of the sales agreement across the table. Mark's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. "Yes. What's your point, Henderson? Get to it." The arrogance was still there, but a seed of uncertainty was beginning to sprout in his eyes. "My point, Mark," the lawyer said, his voice dropping, becoming as cold and hard as marble, "is that Article 9, Section 4 of your parents' will, the will you have been operating under, contains the following clause." He then read the clause aloud, the legal language, a death sentence to my brother's ambitions. "Should the executor, Mark, take any formal action to list for sale or enter into a contract to sell the primary residence within 365 days of my death, the entirety of this last will and testament shall be rendered immediately null, void, and without effect." The color drained from Mark's face. Tiffany, who had been scrolling on her phone, looked up, her perfectly sculpted brow furrowed in confusion. "What does that mean?" she asked. Mark just stared at Mr. Henderson, his mouth slightly agape. That's not possible. That can't be legal." "I assure you it is perfectly legal," Mr. Henderson replied. "Your father was one of the most brilliant contract lawyers I have ever known. He was also a man who wanted to give you a chance to prove his fears about your character were unfounded. By attempting to sell the house for a quick profit, you failed his test. That will," he tapped the original document, "is now nothing more than a historical document. It has no legal power." "So, who gets everything?" Mark whispered, the words catching in his throat. That was my cue. For the first time I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the silent room. I do, Mark. Mr. Henderson slid the second will across the table. As per your father's instructions, the revocation of the first will immediately enacted a secondary will, which he also left in my care. This is now the binding document. He cleared his throat. I, David, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, with the exception of the Mark Miller Remedial Trust, to my beloved daughter, Lily, who has been the steadfast heart of our family. She shall serve as the sole executor and beneficiary. Mark snatched the will, his hands shaking as he read it. His face, a mask of arrogant triumph just minutes before, crumbled into a mess of disbelief, fury, and panic. This is a trick, a forgery. I'll sue you both, he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me and the lawyer. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Henderson said calmly. Everything has been executed perfectly. The documents are ironclad. Your father's instructions were explicit. Any attempt to contest this will would be considered frivolous, and you would be responsible for all legal fees. Fees which, I might add, you would have to pay yourself, as the estate is no longer yours. Finally, I looked directly at my brother, the man who had tried to erase me. There was no triumph in my heart, only a profound, weary sadness. You did this to yourself, Mark, I said softly. He gave you a choice, family or money, and you chose money. You always do. Tiffany stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked from Mark's pale, panicked face to me, then back again. The calculation was visible in her eyes. The dream of renovating the grand house, of a life funded by a massive inheritance, had just evaporated. I have to go, she said, grabbing her purse. Mark, call me later. But the way she said it, we all knew she wouldn't be answering. She walked out of the room without a backward glance. Mark slumped in his chair, a broken man. The swagger, the arrogance, the entire carefully constructed facade of the Golden Sun had been stripped away, leaving behind someone small, lost, and utterly defeated. The greatest irony was that my father, the man he had spent his life trying to impress with his wealth, had valued something else entirely. And in the end, it was my quiet, steadfast love for our home and our family that had been recognized as the true legacy. I stood up, leaving him there in the silence of his own making. As I walked out of that office and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt the weight of a lifetime of being less than lift from my shoulders. The fight was over, but a new, more complicated journey was just beginning. Walking out of that law office was like taking my first breath after being held underwater for a lifetime. The city sounds the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of traffic felt vibrant and new. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for as long as I could remember had finally been lifted. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the footnote in my family's story. I was the protagonist, the executor, the steward of my parents' true legacy. My first call was to Clara. When I told her what happened, she let out a whoop of joy so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I'm buying the most expensive champagne I can find, she declared. We are celebrating tonight, and we did. For the first time since my parents' death, I allowed myself to feel something other than grief or anger. I felt a profound sense of relief, a quiet, glowing joy that was tinged with the sadness of what it had cost to get here. The immediate aftermath for Mark was as swift as it was brutal. His world imploded. The pending cash offer on the house, of course, was immediately voided. Mr. Henderson's office formally notified the real estate agent that Mark had no authority to sell the property. The news of his disinheritance spread through our extended family like wildfire. The relatives who had offered me their pity just weeks before were now calling with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Mark, as predicted, tried to fight. He hired a lawyer and made threats, but it was all bluster. His own attorney, after reviewing the documents, advised him that any legal challenge would be a waste of money he no longer had. The remedial trust my father had left him provided a small monthly stipend, enough to cover basic living expenses, but it was a pittance compared to the millions he had believed were his. It was a safety net, not a golden parachute. He called me a week after the confrontation. His voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual arrogance. It was small and pleading. "Lily, you can't do this. We're family. You can't just take everything." "I didn't take anything, Mark," I replied, my voice calm and firm, a voice I barely recognized as my own. "I accepted what our father left me. Just as you were prepared to accept what you thought he left you. The only difference is that Dad's final test revealed who he truly trusted to honor his legacy." "But I have nothing!" he cried, his voice cracking. "Tiffany left me. My credit cards are maxed out. I could lose my apartment." "You have the trust fund," I reminded him. "It's more than many people have. It's a chance to start over, to build something real for yourself instead of just coasting on Dad's money." The conversation ended there. It was the first of many boundaries I would have to draw. My first act as executor was to go back to the house. I walked through the familiar rooms, no longer a tenant on a deadline, but the rightful owner. The garish "for sale" sign was gone from the lawn. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, running my hand along the books in my father's study. The colored stickers Mark had placed on everything were still there, stark reminders of his intentions. I spent the entire weekend peeling them off, each one I removed feeling like a small act of reclamation. The 90-day clock was no longer ticking. I had a home, but I also had a massive responsibility. The estate was complex, with investments and properties that I knew nothing about. I spent the next few months in a crash course of financial literacy, guided by Mr. Henderson and a team of advisors he helped me assemble. It was daunting, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I was in control not just of my own small life, but of a significant future. Mark's life, meanwhile, continued its downward spiral. Without the safety net of our parents' wealth, his high-risk financial career turned out to be a house of cards. He had been leveraging their name and implied financial backing for years. When that vanished, his can't-miss deals fell apart. He lost his job, was forced to sell his expensive car, and had to move out of his glass-walled apartment into a small studio in a less glamorous part of the city. He was, for the first time in his life, truly on his own. He was forced to become the one thing he had always looked down on me for being: practical. I had won. I had the house, the security, the validation. But as I sat alone in the quiet of my father's study, surrounded by the life he had entrusted to me, I realized that untangling the financial mess was the easy part. The real work, rebuilding a life and redefining what family meant, was just beginning. 1 year can change everything. A year after I walked out of Mr. Henderson's office as the sole heir to my parents' estate, my life was both profoundly different and, in many ways, exactly the same. The house on Elm Street was no longer a place of grief and impending eviction. It was my sanctuary, my home, and now, my place of business. The quiet, predictable rhythm I had cherished before had returned, but now it was underscored by a new sense of security and purpose. The most significant change was the birth of the Eleanor and David Miller Library Foundation. Using a portion of the estate's funds, I established a nonprofit dedicated to a cause that felt like a perfect fusion of my parents' passions and my own. My father, for all his flaws, was a man who believed in the power of knowledge, and my mother had been a lifelong supporter of local arts and culture. The foundation provided grants to underfunded public libraries and schools, specifically for the acquisition of rare books and the restoration of historical documents. We funded programs that brought authors to low-income neighborhoods and helped libraries digitize their archives. The work was deeply fulfilling. It gave my parents' legacy a meaning that went far beyond stock portfolios and property values. It was a legacy of community and learning, and I knew, somewhere deep in my heart, they would be proud. I also turned my own passion into a profession. I converted the large, sunlit room above the garage, a space Mark had intended to turn into a man cave, into a state-of-the-art book restoration studio. I still worked part-time at the public library, unable to completely leave the world I loved, but my private restoration business took off. I worked on priceless first editions for universities and private collectors, my patient, meticulous nature finally being seen not as a liability, but as a rare and valuable skill. The house was filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a scent I had always associated with peace. Now, it was also the scent of my independence. My relationship with Mark evolved, or rather, I allowed it to evolve into something new and boundaried. After hitting rock bottom, he had been forced into a period of deep introspection. The remedial trust, while small to him, was a lifeline that came with a condition my father had wisely included. He had to attend financial counseling and therapy sessions to continue receiving it. It was a slow, painful process for him. For the first 6 months, he didn't speak to me. Then, one day, he showed up at my door. He looked different. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost fragile humility. He didn't ask for money. He just wanted to talk. We sat on the back patio, the same one where he had dismissed my pleas just a year before. He apologized. It wasn't a grand, dramatic apology, but a quiet, broken one. He admitted his jealousy, his sense of entitlement, and his profound insecurity. "I spent my whole life chasing Dad's approval," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought having more money, a bigger title, meant I was winning. I never realized he wasn't keeping score the way I was. It was the beginning. We didn't magically become best friends. The years of hurt and neglect couldn't be erased. But we started to build something new, something more honest. I established firm boundaries. Our relationship could not be about money or obligation. He had to respect my life and my decisions. He agreed. He started visiting once a month. We would have coffee, talk about our lives. He had taken a lower-level job at a small accounting firm, humbled but also, he admitted, relieved to be free from the crushing pressure he had put on himself. For the first time, he asked me about my work, about the books I was restoring, and he listened with genuine interest. He was finally seeing me, Lily, his sister, not just the family's quiet wallpaper. The justice my father had envisioned had been served, but it wasn't punitive. It was corrective. By taking away the wealth Mark had worshipped, my father had given him a chance to find his own worth. And by giving me the resources, he had given me a chance to amplify the values I had always held dear. Clara remained my rock, my chosen family. We had weekly dinners, and she was the first person I called with any news, good or bad. Mr. Henderson became a mentor and a cherished friend, a living link to my father. He served on the board of my foundation, his weary eyes now often twinkling with pride during our meetings. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost exactly a year after the confrontation, Mark came over to help me rake the leaves in the backyard, a chore I had always done alone. We worked in a comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic scratching of the rakes the only sound. "You know," he said, pausing to lean on his rake, "I read the letter Dad left for you. I had shown it to him a month earlier, a difficult but necessary step in our reconciliation. He called you the steadfast heart of the family. He was right. He looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. In that moment, I realized the true nature of my inheritance. It wasn't the house or the money. It was the chance for a new beginning. Not just for me, but for the fractured pieces of the family I had thought were lost forever. As I stand here today, in the quiet of my own home, a home that I almost lost, I often think about the nature of value. For my entire life, I lived in a family that measured value in dollars, in job titles, in outward displays of success. My brother was a masterpiece of oil on canvas, bold and expensive, demanding attention. I was a pencil sketch in the corner, easily overlooked. The greatest lesson I've learned is that the world's valuation of you is not your actual worth. True worth is quiet. It's in the steadfast loyalty, the patient care, the love that shows up day after day without needing applause. It's in the meticulous work of restoring something broken, whether it's an old book or a fractured family. My father's final act was a profound gift. He didn't just leave me an inheritance. He left me a validation that resonated deeper than any bank account balance. He saw me. In the end, that was all I had ever truly wanted. His test for my brother wasn't just about money, it was a lesson in legacy. A legacy isn't the number at the bottom of a balance sheet. It's the impact you leave on the lives you touch. It's the community you build, the knowledge you share, the love that endures. The money has allowed me to build a foundation that will help people for decades to come, turning my parents' memory into a force for good. The security has allowed me to turn my passion into a thriving business. But the most valuable thing I gained had nothing to do with the millions in the bank. It was the freedom to define my own life, to set my own terms, and to build relationships based on mutual respect, not on a deeply ingrained, unjust hierarchy. It gave me the courage to draw boundaries with my own brother, and in doing so, it paradoxically gave our relationship the only real chance it ever had to be healthy. My life now is rich in ways I could never have imagined. It's rich with the purpose I find in my work, the genuine connection I share with my friend Clara, and the fragile, blossoming hope of a new relationship with my brother. Most importantly, it is rich with a hard-won sense of peace, the peace that comes from knowing your own worth, independent of anyone else's approval. The constant, low-grade anxiety of being less than, a feeling that had been my lifelong companion, is finally gone. I have built a life that aligns with my values, not with my insecurities. Perhaps the most important lesson is this. Sometimes the people who are meant to love you most will fail you. They will fail to see you, to value you, to protect you. And when that happens, you have to be willing to become your own protector. You have to be willing to search for the hidden clauses in your own life, the truths that can set you free. Standing up for yourself isn't an act of selfishness. It's an act of survival and self-respect. It's the only way to build a foundation strong enough to hold the life you truly deserve. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your family saw you completely differently than who you truly were? What did you do to reclaim your own narrative? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of overcoming challenges and finding your own strength. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that their quiet value is more powerful than the world's loudest opinions. Thank you for listening. And may you always find the courage to read the fine print of your own life and discover the strength that has been written there all along.